I'll go like I'm
We have to go back to grade school to see where that is.
my 50-year high school reunion is this year.
And everyone in this country knew that.
All right, good evening, everybody. Getting ready to get started here. How about that State of the Union address last night, huh? It's really something. Now, I don't want anyone here tonight with scowls on their faces and sitting on their hands and looking at their phones. And I fully expect when our speaker gets up here that you will stand and applaud after every third sentence. That's now the new standard. Hi, my name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. And, last night's State of the Union address had a little treat in it for us. Our new President and CEO, Tim Huelskamp, who I think just escaped the room. He was just here. He was visiting the White House a couple of weeks ago. He was talking to one of the President's aides, high-level aides, and he asked Tim, he said, is there anything you'd like to have in the State of the Union address? Now, any line in the State of the Union address, that is like, that's golden territory. That is very difficult to get in. And he goes, well, let's see. We've been giving you support and research and access to people to help on your energy and environment policy, so I'll not ask for that. That's probably already in there. This is great. And so we have this new project that we're working on here at the Heartland Institute called Free to Choose Medicine, the idea of reforming the Food and Drug Administration to make it easier for people to get access to life-saving drugs. So Tim said, how about Right to Try? And he said, all right, I'll write that down. Well, we'll see. And actually Tim texted me. He thought he saw in the gallery a pretty famous advocate for Right to Try prescription drugs, experimental prescription drugs to save lives. And then, I texted back to him, and I captured a picture, and I said, is this her? And he goes, oh, no, that's not her. So I thought, oh, well, I guess I got my hopes up for the Right to Try. I guess it's not going to happen. And then there was a point about halfway through the speech where I could hear him building up to talking about prescription drugs. And, of course, his last line in that two-paragraph section was, Americans need the right to try. And yee! It was pretty exciting to have that happen because there wasn't a lot of new policies that the president had to State of the Union address last night. He's going over quite a year of accomplishment in his first year. And other than prison reform and Right to Try prescription drugs, I can't actually recall any new proposal or at least a new policy idea that he had talked about that he had never talked about before, because I don't think the words Right to Try had ever crossed his lips before. And so hearing Right to Try was a fantastic accomplishment, I suppose, for the Heartland Institute. We're very glad that the president has this on his radar. And my second favorite thing about the State of the Union address is that the words climate change never crossed his lips. And I think we're going to enjoy having that not happen for the next 4 years, which is fantastic because, humans aren't causing climate change, and it's not a problem. So with that, if I didn't introduce myself, I am the Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. And, the Heartland Institute was founded in 1984 by Dave Padden, our founding president. And Joe Bass became the first employee of the Heartland Institute. His retirement is actually this week. Tomorrow's his last day in the office. Tim Huelskamp is now our president and CEO. Joe's not going anywhere, for those of you who are a little worried. He's going to remain as a director and a senior fellow. He's going to be doing a lot of writing and editing and thinking, and I'm sure he's going to be bugging me via email quite regularly, so he's never going to be gone from me, and I'm sure he's not going to be gone from the organization as well. But the idea of the Heartland Institute is to advance liberty, to advance freedom, to work toward good government, for instance, the best government we can get, I guess. And that's why our speaker tonight We haven't had someone talking on this topic specifically before, so we're very excited to have him here tonight. If you like what you hear today or tonight and like what you see online, I hope you will consider joining the Heartland Institute as a supporter or a donor. Or you can volunteer. We have volunteers in here a lot that work to advance freedom and liberty. So if that's important to you, there's information on your tables about how you can join the Heartland Institute. I hope you will consider that. And if you have any questions about the organization, you can just ask me or any other staffer here. We'd be happy to chat with you about that. You can also check out our podcast, which is on iTunes, the Heartland Daily Podcast, and we have several other podcasts on different policy areas. It was downloaded 2.4 million times last year, which is pretty amazing. We're very happy with that product. So if you like going to the gym and listening to policy, or walking the dog and listening to policy, or turning it on and listening to policy to fall asleep, I do that sometimes. The Heartland Daily Podcast is a great way to get more information about good free market policy. So I hope you'll consider putting that on your phone. And with that, I appreciate your attention. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. His name is Scott Murphy. He was born and raised on a farm in central Illinois. He receives his degree in business administration from Illinois Wesleyan University. He farmed the family farm until 2003 when he founded SeedEquipment.com, a company that deals in equipment used in the hybrid seed industry. His company sells to over 30 countries worldwide. And he's also now an author, and he's here to talk about his first book, The Term Limit Revolution. This is a very interesting theory he has in here, and if you're for term limits, if you're against term limits, by the time he's done presenting, we have Q&A, you're going to know a lot more about it and maybe even change your mind. I had a podcast with him earlier today, and now I'm on the fence again. So let's see where I end up at the end of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Scott Murphy.
Put my clock up there for you. No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate that. The book came out last fall, and we're trying to promote it, so this is actually my first speaking engagement, so please be gentle with me. I became interested in term limits a long, long time ago, but like most people, I thought there's no way that we're ever going to get term limits because the people that are going to have to vote for term limits are the people that are voting on term limits, and it's kind of like firing yourself. Very few people do that. But I started researching term limits, getting into more what it's about and what it would do. And one of the things I found was that nearly every issue that we have today that we're dealing with would be lessened by the implementation of term limits. But I still wasn't sure that we could get them done. And as I got working on them further and further, I discovered that there is a way that we can get them done. And in fact, there is a way that we can make it so that passing term limits is the least objectionable option for the folks in Washington, D.C., and we'll get to that later on. But the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about why do we need term limits. My question is, do you really think that we've got the best people for the job in Washington and Springfield? No, you're right. No, we don't. We don't. And we can't get rid of them. We can't get rid of these people. Right now, the number one job, the number one priority for a politician is to get reelected. If they don't get reelected, then they're out. So that's their number one job. If we put term limits in, every other priority at least moves up one notch because we took out their number one priority. Now, I don't know what their new number one priority will be, but whatever it is, other things will move up. One of the things that they have to do if they want to stay in office forever is they have to raise money. 60 Minutes did a segment, season 48, episode 33. David Jolly, who is a congressman from Florida, talked about how Democrats and Republicans both, they've got a call center. And every member of Congress is expected to put in 30 hours a week telemarketing, raising funds. Now, 30 hours a week, if you had to give 30 hours a week of your job to do something else, how much time do you have left to do your job? Not all that much. Now, if they don't do this, then the party's not going to back them. If they don't have the party backing them, they could be out of a job. But if we took and we put term limits on them, they couldn't get elected in perpetuity. They couldn't just stay in there. So now they don't really have to be beholden to the party. They don't have to raise all that money because they're not going to just keep running forever and ever and ever. So they can work on other things. They can take that 30 hours and they can go work on things for the people. Now, what we're suggesting is 2 terms in the Senate, 3 terms in the House, 12 years and 6 years. May not be perfect, but it'd be a lot better than what we've got right now. Because once we have a limit on them, then again, they're no longer beholden to the party. Our partisanship, which is another issue that we have that is divides the country. And it's gotten to the point where people who have been friends forever, they're posting on Facebook, if you voted for Donald Trump, unfriend me now. I don't want to be your friend. Over your politics, you're going to throw away somebody who's been your friend for 50 years because they voted for somebody that you didn't like. That kind of partisanship is poison to a country. But if we had term limits, we could have people who would reach across the aisle, who could do things in a bipartisan way. We could take the best ideas of all worlds. And not everything the Republicans say is bad or good, and not everything that the Democrats say is bad or good. There are things in both parties that can be good. Problem is, in order to appease the party masters, you have to sit and toe that party line in order to make sure that you have their support, that you don't get primaried, and that you've got their money in the general election. And that kind of partisanship, that breeds partisanship. That makes it so that we have the people fighting. They have to have the people fighting. If they don't have people fighting, then they become irrelevant. So they have to put on a show. And you'll see these folks in Congress standing up there thumping on their chest saying how they're the only thing that's going to keep you safe from the other side for whatever reason. And it really reminds me of professional wrestling, where the guys come out and they beat on their chests and they're going to do all this. I grew up downstate. Professional wrestling would come to Richwoods High School. And I knew some of the wrestlers, the real wrestlers, high school wrestlers. I wrestled in high school. So I knew some of the kids from Richwoods. And they'd say that the wrestlers would come in, and they'd be, oh, how you doing? How you been? How's the family? How's all this sort of thing? And they were all great friends. And then as soon as they walked out the doors, then they had to hate one another, and they put on that show. And that's what we get here. We get these guys and gals out in Washington that they put on a show for us. They stand up and they rail against the other side, and then we get people on Facebook saying, unfriend me if you voted for Donald Trump. That shouldn't happen. And it wouldn't happen if these folks weren't so divided in Washington, and if they weren't going to be there for their life, they would not be as divided there either. So the partisanship would be cut down a great deal by putting term limits in. The disconnect that we have between Congress and the people that they represent, that would be lessened a great deal. Somebody who's been in Congress for 50 years, what do they know about traffic jams? What do they know about going to the grocery store? What do they know about living an ordinary life? What do they know about the things that the ordinary people go through? They don't. So if we had term limits, people would come out of ordinary life, go to Washington, serve their time, and they would come back to ordinary life. They wouldn't stack the deck against the people that live in ordinary life, because in 6 years they're going to have to come back and live it themselves. So these folks in Washington, they would not put things on us that they wouldn't want to live with, because they're going to have to live with it. Our finances would be better off. Our budgets would be better off. Oftentimes they'll build the bridge to nowhere because they can bring money back home, they can put people back to work, they can do this sort of thing. But if you're only going to be in Congress for 6 years, you don't want to start a bridge to nowhere, because you're going to be out by the time it's done. You're not even going to get to cut the ribbon. Somebody else is going to do that. So and when you come back after 6 years, you're going to have to pay for that bridge to nowhere. It's going to be your taxes. So again, term limits would make it so that they're more responsible to us, because they will become one of us again. Now, some people talk about fair districts. That's what we need, is we need fair districts. we need to end the gerrymandering, and it is a problem. But even gerrymandering would be lessened by term limits. Right now, Luis Gutierrez District is built for Luis Gutierrez. It's not built for anybody else. It's built for him. It's that C that then comes down on 294. Actually, I need to go do that. I'm not good in the mirror here. But the C comes down, and it goes down 294, and then it comes back around here and widens back out. You can't gerrymander if you don't know who your representative is going to be. Because if they build that district that way, that may not be the best thing for the next person that they put in. So they aren't going to be stacking the deck that way with the gerrymandered districts as much. They're still going to do it. They're still going to try and get away with it to benefit the party, but they won't be doing it to benefit an individual person like they do right now. Lobbying would be lessened a great deal as well. Lobbyists, they come in, they buy somebody. Jack Abramoff, excuse me just a second here. He said, when I was a lobbyist, frankly, I was against term limits because once you purchased an office, you didn't want to have to repurchase that office down the line. But we would make them buy them every 6 years. And who would they buy? Who would they buy in the primary? They couldn't go in and in a contested race, they couldn't come in and pick somebody, because if they did, what if they lost? Then the person who wins, they're going to be on the outs with them. And the lobbyists are going to have to spread their money over all these different districts, 435 House seats. And if they were up every 6 years, there's a new one in every one. You're going to have 435 divided by 3. What's that come out to be? 145, somewhere around in there? 145. Every year you're going to have 145 open seats in the House, and you're going to have 16 open seats in the Senate. So they're going to have to spread that money around a lot more places. Right now they say there's 16 competitive districts in this upcoming off-term election. 16 districts. So they're going to pour all their money, they're going to pour all this stuff, they're going to buy somebody to put in that seat. If they got to buy 130 people every 2 years, that's going to get quite expensive. They're not going to be able to do it with the effect that they've got today. And once they buy them, they only get to have them for 6 years. So the lobbyists, the power that the lobbyists have would go down a great deal. The power of incumbency would be reduced. Incumbency right now, they're elected at over a 96% rate. 96% retention of those that run as incumbents get elected. They've got a 13% approval rating. The incumbents have such an advantage in name recognition, in a ground game already set up. They've got the party behind them. And if they're in a partisan district, and the party says there's an unwritten rule, you don't primary somebody in your own party. If you're not going to get primaried, and you're in a partisan district, if you're in the south side of Chicago, and you don't get a primary, you're a Democrat, you're going to be there for as long as you want to be. 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, it's up to you, it's not up to the people. If we had free and fair elections, it would be a different story. We don't. Then we're not even close to having free and fair elections. The war chest that these people build up over time, if you're a doctor, a plumber, whatever, if you decide you want to run, you don't stand a chance. It's almost like running a 100-yard dash where you have to give the incumbent a 90-yard head start. I don't care if you're the Olympic champion, if you're the greatest in the world. I can still beat you if all I got to do is run 10 yards. And I'm turning 60 next birthday. So I could be the Olympic champion if I got a 90-yard head start. And that's what the incumbents have. And they set the rules up. They are the ones that set the rules. They're the ones that govern themselves, and they haven't done a good job of it so far. But they have done a good job of breaking up the issues so that they get the people fighting. I keep going back to things because everything kind of circles back around. They've set these things up so that everybody's fighting, and they set it up so that each party has co-opted one side of an issue. Pro-gun, anti-gun. Pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro-immigration, anti-immigration. You can go down through and you can say, this one belongs to the Republicans and this one belongs to the Democrats. And they march in lockstep with that. The one issue that they can't co-opt is term limits. Because if one side really brings them up, then the other side has to too, and that's the nuclear option. Mutually assured destruction for the professional politician. So they've split up all these other issues, but that's the one issue that we have that we can get together with both sides. And it's going to take bipartisan cooperation in terms of the people. Now, I've told you why we need term limits, and now I can tell you how. My mother gave me a book on prohibition. I read a lot. She gave me this book on prohibition, and as I was reading it, one of the things they said was only 15% of the people wanted prohibition. And you think, well, how could 15%, how could they get anything done? You only got 15% of the people. They got 15% of the people from a diverse group. They came from Republicans, Democrats, urban, rural, men, women. They came from everywhere. So they had 15% of a very diverse group of Americans. And they went to the politicians and they said, we are voting next time and we are only voting for someone who is for prohibition. So if you were winning, if you were a politician, you were winning 58 to 42. You're winning by 16%. You're doing good. You've pretty much got it in the bag. But if your opponent says, okay, now I'm for prohibition, and they take 15% of 58%, you can wind up with a little bit over 8, and you take those and you give those people to the opponent over here, and now the opponent is winning a little bit over 50% to a little bit under 50%. So with 15%, they were able to affect these elections and get elected who they wanted to elect. They had people terrified. Right now, there's 75 to 80% of the Americans want term limits. If Americans come together in the way that they did during Prohibition, it would be very easy. It would be very easy to get term limits passed, much in the same way that they did there. And that frightens the politicians a great deal, and that's why they have to keep us fighting. That's why they have to put on that professional wrestling show. That's why they have to make the Republicans afraid of the Democrats and Democrats afraid of the Republicans, and have people saying, unfriend me on Facebook if you voted for Donald Trump. They love that. They need that. That is how they're going to stay in power. So the way to get term limits passed is to do the one-issue politics, to triage our issues and say everything will be better if we have term limits passed. So the strength in numbers, that's what'll help. That's what'll make it work. A single stick can break. A group of sticks can't be broken. So how do we get this, how do we make this work? Well, the first thing we can do is we can try and vote them out. If we get people together and we say, we're going to vote you out, maybe we'll get it done, maybe we won't. Maybe these politicians will keep their job, maybe they won't. That's the first thing we can do. And I'm sure we can get some of them voted out, maybe not all of them. We can get some of them voted out. So that's the first issue. And that's the first way. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe they'll keep their job, maybe they won't. The second way is a convention of states. And if we call a convention of states and we put in there, we're going to have term limits, enough states call for the convention, enough states ratify the amendment that's passed through the convention, then the people in Washington have absolutely nothing to say about it. It's done. They're out, and they're out immediately. The last way that we have to pass this is by getting together and putting enough pressure on them and make them believe we are going to do this with the convention of states, or we are going to vote you out. And then they can vote and they can pass their own amendment that has 12 years in the Senate, 6 years in the House, and they can exempt themselves from it. So those who have already been elected, they're not subject to term limits. Now, I don't like that idea. I don't like that at all. because it won't fix the problem immediately. But if we had done that back in 1970, I would not be here today talking to you. So this is not something that we're doing to fix things immediately. This is something that we're doing for our children and for our grandchildren. They're the ones that are going to benefit from this. Had our parents and our grandparents done this, we would have been the ones to benefit from it. So the question then becomes, do we want to do this and pass on what we have, or do we want to pass on what we could have? And that's the question that you've got to answer. And if we're going to do this, we have to do it in a bipartisan way. You have to leave your politics at home. We can't have people fighting over other issues whenever we need to be united with term limits. People can unite. Governments have a hard time doing it. Political parties have a hard time doing it. How many people know of the World War I Christmas truce? Okay. Most people here know about that. Christmas Eve, we got the French and the English over here. They're singing Christmas carols. We got the Germans over here. They're singing Christmas carols. Christmas Day, a German comes out of the trench, which you never do because you'll get shot. But he came out, and some of these guys over here, they go, well, what's he want? So they kind of went out. Another bunch came out, and pretty soon they're all out. And you've got guys trading buttons and pins, and you've got medics trading. They're trading medicine, and you got a German who cut hair, who's got a razor to a French officer's throat, shaving him. And the people, the men started to see one another as what they were, other men. Well, when the powers that be found out, their heads exploded. They couldn't have this. They can't have that because how can we get these guys to shoot a machine gun at those over there and mow them down and destroy them? How do we get them to fire artillery shells on them when they were just cutting one another's hair? So they said, we can't do that. And that's what the parties would say. That's what the political parties, they'll say, no, you can't go talk to a Democrat. No, don't do that. You need to stay right here in your bubble. There was an incident in Dallas. You can look it up and you can see it on YouTube, where there was a Black Lives Matter protest. And then there was a counter protest over here. And one cop in between them. And the cop was pretty nervous because this was kind of a powder keg, just waiting for that one spark to set it off. And a couple of the Black Lives Matter guys, they came walking out in the middle of the street. They stood in the middle of the street. So a couple of the counter protesters, they came out, see what these Black Lives Matter guys wanted. So they got to talking. And they talked a little bit more, and they talked. Nobody threw a fist. Nobody was yelling. So some more people came out here, and some more people came here. And they just kept coming and coming and coming until finally all these people are out in the middle of the street and they're talking. They're having a conversation, not a confrontation. So they're talking, and the policeman now is very relieved because he's not going to have a riot on his hands. Pretty soon everybody puts their arms around one another. The policeman leads them in prayer, and off they go. Now, the next time that these Black Lives Matter folks are at one of these places where they start screaming, what do we want, dead cops, when do we want them now? They're going to sit back and they're going to go, no. I don't really want, I kind of like that guy. He was a nice guy. And the guys who were the counter protesters, when they say, oh, these guys are the Black Lives Matter, these guys are just out, I can say, no, I talked to some of these guys. They're really pretty nice folks. We need to see what we can do to make everybody get along. That's how we get it done. That's how we take the power back. That's how we get this thing to work the way that we want it to. So what do you got? What can you do? You can speak up. You can buy the book. You can, I'm not getting rich off of it, I can tell you that. Buy it and loan it to people. You just keep loaning it out. Get people to read it. That book is the playbook that would say we are going to unite. So it will unite. We need everybody singing off the same song sheet. We can't have everybody going in different directions. That's what will divide us. So we can't have that. We need everybody united. So talk to people. We can we can at least do that. Talk to people who are not necessarily in agreement with you on other issues. We have 80%, 75, 80% of the people who want term limits. Odds are 4 out of 5 people you talk to are going to want term limits. And if that's the case, go for the low-hanging fruit. You don't need to change anybody's mind. Talk to them. Say, hey, what do you think about term limits? They say, well, I really like them. Well, hey, read this copy of this book. Go to U.S. Term Limits. I wrote the book in coordination with them, U.S. Term Limits. Go to them, sign the petition, send a letter to your congressman, do what they're telling you to do there, unite. Everybody working together, we can get this done. Now, if somebody says, I don't like term limits, you say, well, thank you for your time, and go away. Because instead of trying to convince them, you just go get 4 more people. The next 4, odds are, they're going to say, I want it. So we need to get the word out to more and more people and make them believe that we can actually get this done. Because until I came across the thing with prohibition, I didn't think we could get it done either. So once everybody's together, how do we do it then? Well, this can be the laziest revolution known to man. It really can. Because what do you got to do? Do nothing. When it comes to voting, do nothing. I'm not going to tell you, if you've got a Democrat over here that says, I want term limits, and you've got a Republican that says, I don't, and you're a staunch Republican, I'm not going to tell you to vote for the Democrat, but don't vote for the Republican. And tell them that. Tell them, I'm not going to vote for you. You're not for term limits. I'm not voting for you. I'm not voting in this election because you're not for term limits. I'm not going to vote for your opponent. We have enough people that if we did that, they would have to listen. They would have to do what we wanted them to do. They would have to do what the prohibitionists wanted them to do. They would have to pass term limits. And if we give them that, we can give them that least objectionable option, they could get this done. If they felt threatened, they could get this done very, very, very quickly. So we don't need to drink the Kool-Aid of the political parties that says, don't talk to the other side. That's how we get it done. When somebody on the other side reaches their hand out, make sure you take it, work with them, and together we can get this thing accomplished. My book is about national politics. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. How many people here think Mike Madigan is a huge problem for the state of Illinois? Okay. I thought so. We're going to go back a little bit in time. We're going to go back to 1970. In 1970, I was 11 years old. I had full head of hair, had no hair on my chest. We had a party line telephone. Mary Tyler Moore Show debuted. The Partridge Family debuted. You could watch the Red Skelton Show, Beverly Hillbillies, Hogan's Heroes, Brady Bunch. They were all in first run. The Beatles were still together. Richard Nixon was in his first term. Gas was 36 cents a gallon. DDT was still being used. Twin Towers hadn't been built. Disney World hadn't been built. Apollo 13 was launched. And that was the year Mike Madigan first came into the Speaker's office, or into the House of Representatives. That long ago. I mean, again, I was 11. I can't even remember back that far. So, if you think Mike Madigan is a big part of the problem, do you think Illinois would be better off if we didn't send Mike Madigan back to Springfield? Is there anybody, any congressman in Illinois that you think is so good that you would rather have them and Madigan go back or them and Madigan stay home? Because a lot of people say, I don't want to lose my congressman. I can understand that. But would you rather lose yours or keep Mike? Because you can't have both. So my question again goes back to, should we put term limits in Illinois? Because if we do, we can get rid of Madigan, but we can't really neuter the power that he has achieved. Now, this guy's the king of Illinois. If they had done this back in 1970, though, if our parents and grandparents had put term limits on, we wouldn't be dealing with Mike Madigan today. If we put term limits on, our children and grandchildren will not have to deal with the next Mike Madigan. So that's about all I've got to say on the subject, because I think Mr. Madigan says enough for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. I think this microphone isn't quite hooked up. That's okay. You can all hear me. So now it's question and answer time. There it is. The procedure is like this. I have in my hand here a phone. I already saw some comments on the Facebook feed, the live stream on this, and the first comment just said the word Madigan, ... So that's been covered.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll have another one. So I'll be watching to see if anybody has any questions that are watching the stream online. If you have a question, please raise your hand. One of these microphones will come to you. If you would be so kind as to identify yourself so that Scott knows to whom he is speaking, that would be fantastic. We're going to start right over here.
Do you want me to get up? Sure. I'm Brian Higgins. I'm down here from Wisconsin to listen to this presentation. One of the most common objections that I get when this subject comes up is that you put in term limits, the bureaucrats will run everything because you'll have nothing but people, inexperienced legislators. So I'm curious how you would respond to that particular objection.
When was the last time you heard a candidate for Congress running in an open seat say, "Send me to Washington because I don't know anything, and it's going to take me several years to figure it out"? These guys, when they campaign like they know what they're doing already. Some of them do, some of them don't. But the inexperience that most of the time these folks that are coming in here, they're going to have done something else. They're going to have been in Congress here. They're going to have some sort of political, and maybe they don't, but they'll have staff that can work with them. But if staff and lobbyists were going to get a lot of power by term limits, we'd have term limits. There's no question about it, because if they've got that much power, and they're going to get more, they'd put them in. So I don't believe that we're going to have all these inexperienced congressmen. We change presidents every 8 years, sometimes every 4. Most of the time it's every 8. I think President of the United States is a tougher job to master than being a congressman. So when they say that the bureaucrats are going to get more power, I'm just not buying it.
Nice try, Brian. I tried that on the podcast. Same answer right there. We'll go right here to Phil.
Yes, Phil Wickline. Don't take this personally, but while you were speaking, my mind is going how to overcome everything you said. And so my idea works something like this. There's a party alpha and a party beta. And these gentlemen over here, they run party alpha. They're the power behind party alpha. And term limits come along for the House, and we'll knock it all the way down to 6 years for the Senate, 1 term. The people, the word isn't coming to me, the people from different companies, the rent seekers.
The lobbyists?
The lobbyists,
Yes.
Thank you. They go to this power clique over here, and that's who they deal with, one source. And when Senator Fogbaum comes in and takes his office, these gentlemen over here educate Senator Fogbaum, and they tell him, this is the way it's going to be, Senator. This is the way it's going to be, and you go by this. Actually, they're talking to the candidate for that office. This is the way it's going to be, or you're going to be out knocking on doors for votes and money. I think it would just shift to a different level. I think the party hierarchy would become, in both parties, alpha and beta, the powerhouses. And I'm not sure you'd get rid of all the rent seekers out there that are there in Washington to get one favor or another.
If the parties were going to get more power out of term limits, we'd have term limits. Because the people that are in charge of the parties would see to it that we had term limits. If we have term limits, then the party, you're never going to completely eliminate the power that the party has. That's not going to happen. We all know that. But right now, like I said, there's 16 competitive districts. So they can go to the guys that are in the 16. That's all they've got to concentrate on is 16. But they've got other people who have been in the House for 20 years. They don't have to go to them and say, hey, this is how it works. That guy already knows. They already know how it works, and they know that they need to keep their head down, put in their 30 hours of telemarketing, vote yes when you say yes, and vote no when you say no. And if not, they're going to be out on the street. But if we have term limits, they're going to be out on the street in 6 years anyway, so who cares? The difference between 1 term, 2 terms, and 3 terms is not all that much. The difference between 3 terms and 25 terms and a lifetime of being in power and being catered to, that's a big difference. So I think that we would actually have less of that going on. And the lobbyists, once you've paid for a guy, if you bought him his seat and you bought him through the first 3 or 4 or 5 elections, then he's in your pocket. You don't have to buy him again. But in this case here, just like Jack said, we're going to have to buy them all over again. We're going to have to buy them every 6 years. And that would be tougher on the lobbyists. They'd have to spread it out. There's not enough money out there for them. If we've only got 16 competitive districts this time, if they had 135 open seats, it'd take a lot more on there, then they would lose a lot of power, I believe.
As you take office, we want you to spend 30 hours a week raising funds
Right.
for the fellow or lady who's going to follow you, because we took care of you already. We paid the price to get you in.
And Senator Fogbottom could say, no, what are you going to do? Not support me in my next election? I can't run again. So it would take away a lot of that threat. Whereas right today, if they say, don't do this, you say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, I won't do it because I want to be in there for a long time. If you're only going to be in there for another couple of years, you go, hey, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what's best for the people. And we would get people in then who wanted to do the best thing for the people, not going into it knowing I can be in a cush job for 40 years. Yes, sir.
We're going to go right here. No. Oh. And then to Art.
Oh, yes, thank you. Terry Przbilski. I was just wondering, in addition to trying to achieve term limits, here in Illinois, given our somewhat unique situation, do you think there would also be any merit in trying to place limits on family involvement in high political office? And people passing on political offices to their children and grandchildren and nephews and nieces and brothers and sisters, et cetera, like the Madigans and the Dailies and Dick Mell, the father-in-law of Rod Blagojevich, and so forth and so on.
I think that term limits themselves would achieve a lot of that. Because let's go back to 1970. We've got term limits. Mike Madigan gets elected in 1970, 1976. He's back. He's out. Maybe he goes and runs for the Senate. But not everybody can do that. Not everybody's going to be able to stay for that long. He would not have gotten the power. Mike Madigan figured out, he's a brilliant man. You got to hand it to him. Because he could have gone on and he could have been a senator from Illinois and Washington, D.C. He could have done all kinds of things, but he stayed a state rep. They don't make that much money from their salary. So he stayed as a state rep, Speaker of the House, Chairman of the Democratic Party, stayed there for when he wins in November, and he will win in November. When he wins in November, he will have been there for 50 years. And that's made him the king of Illinois. And truly, he is the king. You have to, if you want something done, You have to do what Madigan tells you to do. And if you want something that Madigan doesn't want, you're not going to get it. Well, the man is the king of Illinois. Term limits would have prevented that from happening. And if Madigan wasn't the king of Illinois, maybe Lisa wouldn't be the attorney general.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. Maybe. But if he had only been in for 6 years, the odds of her being attorney general go down quite a bit.
Yeah.
My comment is
Your name?
this. My name is Art Ellingson. I run the Tea Party here in Arlington Heights. And my comment is that I lived in Florida for 5 years, from 2005 to 2010, where they have term limits. You can't be a state rep more than 3 terms. You can't be a state senator more than 2 terms. And their state seems to be pretty functional. So your ideas do work. And there are no Mike Madigans in Florida. But there are lots of famous people who are former speakers of the House. And sometimes they go on to become senators, like Marco Rubio. And sometimes they go on to be congressmen. And sometimes they go on to be state senators, but only for 8 more years. So the maximum in Florida you can be a somebody in the state legislature is 6 plus 8 or 14 years. And to me, that is a very functional state without an income tax.
Yes. And I think that helps. I think that term limits help. We talked on the podcast about California, about how dysfunctional California is, even if it's got term limits. My question is, how much more dysfunctional would it be without term limits? What would it look like then? But I think that you're right, that term limits in Florida have done, they've done the job that they were supposed to. And term limits on a state level does take people who are good at what they do, because they have to run again, and they've got to run against people on a level playing field. So Marco Rubio, when he became a senator in Florida, he did so because the people of Florida liked him. All the people of Florida liked him. Do you really think now that Mike Madigan could get elected senator from Illinois? Because I don't think outside of Mike Madigan's, his district, I don't think there's a lot of people that like him. So Marco Rubio was able to do that because he served the people of Florida. But when he went into the Senate, he didn't go in as an incumbent. And there's a big difference if you come out of the state Senate and you want to run for the Senate in Washington, D.C., you start again against other people. You start going for an open seat, or you're going after an incumbent. You don't have the advantages that the incumbents have in terms of name recognition, in terms of what they can do and what the party can do for them. I remember one of my congressmen, and my district has changed several times, so I keep getting a different congressman. But one of my congressmen, he had an opponent one time. One time he had an opponent. And I got 5 pieces of mail from him. And they weren't from his campaign. They were paid for by the taxpayer. And they were just little newsletters telling me how things were going, and how great things were, and what he'd done, and what was coming up, and all that sort of thing. And they never said vote for him, but they were, well, he can't say vote for me, but he can have the taxpayer's dime come and pay for 5 mailings to me, and then as soon as he won again, I never heard from him again. I never got another piece of mail from him. So you can't tell me that wasn't voter propaganda that he was sending out. That taxpayers, his opponent's taxes were paying for that. And that's the kind of thing that the incumbents are able to do that gives them an advantage, that gives them a lifetime appointment. If you're in a partisan district and you're not going to get primaried, you get a lifetime appointment. And so people say, we've got free and fair elections. We do not. We do not.
I'm going to go right here.
Thank you. Howard Simons here. I can hold him. I want to make an observation. We're talking about partisanship. Go back to the mid-'60s with Lyndon Johnson, and the passage of the Civil Rights Act. I looked up in the Congress and Senate of 1964 how many people had been there for 3 and 4 terms, and I forget the exact number, but I think it was 48. I mean, it was huge, and we look back at that era as one where we could, get major legislation passed on a bipartisan basis. Now you have people quitting the Senate or deciding not to run for re-election, far more than they ever did then, and yet we seem to be condemned right now to passing major pieces of legislation wholly on a partisan basis. I mean, after all, Obamacare didn't have one Republican vote, and the recent tax bill didn't have one Democratic vote. So you can have a lot of seniority and bipartisanship, or you can have self-imposed term limits and a huge amount of partisanship.
Well, we go back to what they called the textbook Congress, where the good old days, where Congress was able to work together, and there was a lot of bipartisanship that went on. Today there is not that bipartisanship because we can't have it. The party masters can't have you reaching across the aisle. They have to have people on Facebook saying, defriend me if you voted for Donald Trump. They have to have the people at each other's throats so that they can do what they want to do and they can remain relevant. And back in the day, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have all that sort of thing that put people at one another's throats. So we had more bipartisanship back in those days. Things got done more on a bipartisan basis in those days than they do today. And today, one of the things about Congress is every year things get better. And they really do. We talked about Congress. Why didn't we put term limits in at the very beginning in the Constitution? Why didn't we have term limits? And I said, well, 1818, you're a representative from Illinois, and 2 weeks ago when it was 10 below zero, you had to head out for Washington, D.C. How'd you get there? You walked, you rode a horse, you took a flat-bottom boat that they were pushing up the river and all that. We didn't need term limits. People didn't live that long. They couldn't handle that sort of thing. Now, we did have some people that served a long time, but come on. You got to be dedicated if you're going to do that stuff 3 or 4 times. Even when I was 20 years old, I don't want to ride a horse to Washington, D.C. in the dead of winter. So we didn't have to have that. But now today, you call for one of these big old black Suburbans to come pick you up, and they take you out to the airport. You get to these folks can make 10 reservations, and whichever one they're able to get to the first, that's the one they keep. And they don't get charged for that, and they got parking places up there, so they've got the rules written for themselves so that they can do that. And if they do want to get on a plane that it's full, well, you just bump somebody out of first class. That's not a big deal. Put them to the back. So how tough is it to be a senator? How tough is it to be a representative? How tough is it to get back and forth? Now it's not. So these people want to stay forever. I'd want to stay forever. I promise you this. If you send me to Washington, I will be as corrupt as they are. Because you get out there and you get seduced by the power. So the only way to eliminate that is to eliminate the time that they can get seduced.
I have a question over here.
Yeah, my question is, I'm Barbara Schwietert, former mayor of Killdeer. My question is, how do we get term limits on the ballot? In Illinois, we know that Governor Rauner wanted to get term limits on the ballot, and a bunch of us went out and got signatures, and we got enough, but Madigan prevented it. So how do we get it on the ballot?
I don't know. In Illinois, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know how you're going to get it on the ballot in Illinois. But what you can do, if we have enough people, because over 80% of the people in Illinois want term limits. If we band together and we say we are only voting for people who will back term limits, then Mike Madigan's going to get elected in his district, because if you live in the kingdom, you want to stay in the kingdom. If I lived in his district, I'd vote for him too, because of the things that he's able to bring back to that district. But the other people, the other vulnerable Republicans and Democrats, and it's not just Democrats that don't want it and just Republicans that do. My guy, he doesn't want them. He doesn't want term limits. Of course, he's getting ready to be in his 10th term, so he doesn't want them. But he's got somebody running against him now that does want them. We need to run people who will support term limits, and if we get enough in there, if we were to get enough people in there that wanted term limits, Mike Madigan would not be the Speaker of the House. That's how you're going to do it, by banding together. That's the only way it's going to work. And I'm not sure that even that's going to work. It may have to come after he's gone. And that's possible. But my question to you is this: if he leaves, he'll be there 50 years. If he's there for another 10 years, and we did it in 10 years, is it better for your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that we did it, or is it better that we just threw up our hands and said we can't do anything?
We have a question over here.
Yeah. It seems like, okay, you mentioned a contested race where somebody said that they were in favor of term limits, but there's a lot of races where the candidates don't even address term limits. If they're selected by the party, certainly nobody Madigan picks, and he does hand pick, as you touched upon, the Democrats running, so you can vote in the general election, but you're voting for his man if you're voting Democratic. None of them are going to be for term limits. If the Republican's not for term limits, you have no option. So you touched upon the state convention option. Does that, again, have to be on the ballot where people have to vote for it, which Madigan can block? Or
I can't tell you a lot about the state. The book is written on the national level.
No, okay.
And
so on a
I'm
national
not-
level, the state convention option, how do you push? I mean, does the Heartland Institute have enough reach around the country that we can start a state convention across the country to start an initiative to get it on the ballot for a national movement?
The gentleman behind you says that he can answer that question, and I believe he can answer it better than I can.
Hello. Sorry I was late. Customers. I was practicing capitalism. In 1970, we had the CONCON, Constitutional Convention, and our wonderful friends Don Clark Natch and Richard M. Daley and other assorted morons put into our Constitution that we can have a constitutional convention only once every 20 years. The last time we could do that was in 2010, and Jim Edgar did commercials to saying it was the worst idea on earth. Thank you, Jim Edgar. Our next time is in 12 years, 2030, and we can have a ballot. It can be a ballot initiative of the citizens to have another CONCON. I hope we do. You got to wait 12 years.
That should be enough time to get your acting gear, I guess.
But again, if we do it in 12 years, is it better that we do it in 12 years? It's best we do it in 12 minutes. But is it better that we do it in 12 years, or is it better that we just don't do it at all? Because if they would have put term limits in 1970, we would not be dealing with Mike Madigan today. So do we want to leave our grandchildren and our children the opportunity to have another Mike Madigan, or do we want to take that out?
If we don't do it in 12 years, we can do it in 32 years, every 20 years.
Mike Madigan will still be in the assembly.
Yes, he will.
Mike, to answer your question, the Heartland Institute, actually, we have a Center on Constitutional Reform. Chris Talgo behind you is kind of leading up that effort for us here in the office. You two should talk after this event and talk about that, but we are part of the Article 5 movement. There's lots of, what you learn about being part of the Article 5 movement, there's a lot of disagreement about what it should look like. Some people don't like the term CONCON, for instance. It's that slur. I don't have any problem with it. But people want to do term limits with an Article 5 convention. Some people want to do a balanced budget amendment with an Article 5 convention. Some people want to do all sorts of other things. And so we've gone to the conventions that the last one was in Arizona several months back. And so we're active participant in the movement all across the country. We don't take any position on any of these things. We just want to put forward the idea that this is a vehicle for the people to take their government back. And we may have to wait 12 years, but a convention in Illinois would seem to be the only way to fix anything around here. So another question, you can raise your hand right here.
So I was thinking of an effective way to get term limits on the ballot, and that might actually just be a term limits party. So We have a limits party, and of course you don't need to, as a single issue party, the limits party, but I don't think you need to worry too much, because I think anyone responsible and thoughtful enough to want term limits would be a decent steward in the office, at least for the first term.
And if you had people in there, if you had term limits and you had people in there, yeah, I think you're right. They couldn't do more damage than's already been done. I mean, how much worse can we get here? So if you had a term limits party, and they were going to put people out there, we got 80% of the people that want term limits. What you might do with that is you might force the Republican and the Democrat to both come out and say, I want term limits. And go back to Madigan is the guy that says who's going to run in the Democratic primary. There's a lot of truth to that, but not 100%. Because if somebody comes in and says, I want to run as a Democrat and I want term limits, Madigan may say, you get no money, you get nothing, we're not going to support you, we're not going to do this. I don't think he can kill him. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think he can kill him. And if he can't kill him, if we have 80% of the people who want term limits, the voters may say in the Democratic primary, we want that guy who wants term limits. And if that happened enough, and those Democrats said, I know if I vote for Madigan for Speaker, we're never going to have term limits come up, Madigan might not be the Speaker anymore. You know, the people banded together is his worst nightmare. But it's going to take bipartisan effort to make that happen.
Any more questions from the floor? Right here, Howard, again.
Yeah. So go back to a little game theory about primaries. Let's say you have a term limit seat that's going to be open, and multiple parties are having primaries. Now, in the current setup, and when you have multi candidate primaries, is that the people who are more centrist tend to chew each other up, and the persons out on the flank tend to win the primaries. Now, does this mean that you're going to be oscillating between a left-wing winner and a right-wing winner on the general election ballot each time? And is that going to serve to increase or decrease the cumulative partisanship in the legislature?
I have no way of predicting the future, like, to be able to answer that, to give you a definitive answer to say this is exactly what will happen. If you had a whole bunch of people in the primary, yeah. But in most cases, when there's an open seat, you might have 2 or 3 people that are running, I don't think you're always going to get the most extreme to get the nomination, and I don't think that you would actually encourage partisanship, because I think you would discourage partisanship, because the person who gets elected, they're only going to be there for 6 years, so they're not beholding to that party to say, do this and we'll keep you in office for 40 years and you can retire and you can fly on private jets and you can do all these things. You can do all these wonderful things that a congressman gets to do for 40 years. You only get to do it for 6. So you really don't care that much about the party.
But in the good old days we were talking about, you had fewer primaries and less partisanship. Now you have more primaries at each level, and you have a greater level of partisanship. And I think that would sort of compound the issue if we
that would assume that we have that the people in the primary that there's more centrists and 1 extremist. There may be 3 or 4 extremists and 1 centrist. So I don't think you would increase the partisanship. I think you would see a decided decrease in partisanship when the elected officials are no longer beholding to the party masters for everything to make sure that they get reelected in perpetuity.
Back here, Robert.
My issue is the state of Illinois is in serious trouble. We've got a crisis in Illinois. Every 3 minutes somebody moves. We have the worst financial situation of about any state in the country, and you could go down the list of all the problems. We've got a crisis here. Is it naive to think that there are enough good people in the legislature that could organize against Madigan in the Democratic Party, because we've got a crisis? We can't keep pushing the issues down. We're going to be bankrupt. Chicago should file bankruptcy now, and it's not going to be long before Illinois is going to have to face that. So I remember in another state where the Democratic Party had a problem, and they organized and they threw out their own Democratic governor. So I'm just wondering if this crisis couldn't help develop enough people within the state to rise up. That sounds a little naive, but we've got a crisis, and people often don't act until there is a crisis, and we've got one big time.
To take out Mike Madigan with anything but term limits, I go back to what was Machiavelli said in The Prince: if you shoot at the king, you better kill the king. And I'm not sure that anybody has what it takes to kill the king. So if you go against Mike Madigan, you will lose. And if you think that you can sneak if you think that you can go around to all the Democrats without him finding out, I think that is not going to happen. Congressman from down there said that there was a vote, and Madigan was short of what he needed. And he motioned the guys in, took them into his office, said, "What's the problem?" They all blustered up, told him what the problem was. He said, "Okay, here's the deal. Every one of you guys is up for re-election. I'm going to run somebody against you, and you're going to lose. Now, do I have your vote or not?" Everybody walked out with their head down, voted the way he wanted them to. Now, I wasn't there, but that's what one of my congressmen told me. And he said, I saw it happen. So if that's the case, I don't think you're ever going to get the Democrats that are there to band together. And again, you shoot at the king, you better kill the king, and you better not let him know you're going to take the shot. And I don't think that there's any way that you could keep that from him.
Over here again?
Yeah, I'm a former state banker. I was at the Illinois Finance Authority, and we looked at the pension problem, and after we stopped crying, we stopped laughing. And it's a joke. We have roughly 30 cents on the pension dollar when we need, and Wisconsin's at 100 cents on the pension dollar. This is going to be resolved the same way it was resolved in the 1970s with signatures. For those of us who've gotten signatures for candidates, I don't know if you remember, but it used to be if one signature on a page was wrong, the entire page was thrown out until judges had to run. And they had to collect signatures, and all of a sudden, all the other signatures that were good were surviving. Being an Irish Catholic, I have 4 cousins who are judges. It's kind of a law. And I told my 4 cousins, I said, the only way we're going to solve the pension problem is when judges stop getting their pensions because we're broke. All of a sudden, you're going to have a judicial fiat solution in about 24 hours. And that's what's going to happen. And they're going to do what's known as a cram down, where all the university professors getting $300,000 pensions for the rest of their lives with COLAs attached to them are going to end up getting $50,000 pensions. That's what's going to happen. When the judges get screwed financially, when they feel the heat, they start moving.
Time for one more question. All right, Michael.
Just to reinforce what we already talked about, there was a letter to the editor, Daily Herald, from Elliot Hartstein, former village president of Buffalo Grove. He was running for a Democratic House seat, and he wanted to explain why he ended his campaign. It was because Mike Madigan chooses his guy, funds him, decides who's going to be attacked, and he controls that guy. And yeah, exactly what you're saying. Nothing's going to change with Mike Madigan in power.
You're right. Thank you so much for having me. This was the first time that I've spoken to a group, and I couldn't have asked for a finer group to speak to. I appreciate all of your questions, and I appreciate the respectful way that they were asked, and those who disagreed respectfully, and that's what it's all about. So thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it. One other thing. Our Facebook page, we're trying to get 1,000 likes by the end of January. We're at 950. So if you've got a Facebook page, please go to the Term Limit Revolution Facebook page and like it so that we can get there by midnight. Thank you.
All those questions were very respectful. If you want to hear non-respectful questions, you should listen to the podcast that I did with Scott earlier today. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you again for that presentation. And it is a book about national term limits, and you can get your copy for $12 on the way out. And Scott would be happy to sign it for you. But you can't talk about term limits on a national scale in Illinois and not have it turn into a conversation about Madigan. That's for sure. That's what's funny. All right, yeah, so here's the book right here. I'm going to send you all out of here. I hope you grab this flyer 1 week from tonight, as we have a lot of our events on Wednesday nights. Heartland Institute Research Fellow Isaac Orr, who's also a comedian as well as a research fellow for us, so it should be a really good presentation. He does a lot of our research on fracking and coal and energy policy. And he wrote a chapter in the New Patriots Toolbox edition that we've published recently, and he'll be talking about the energy chapter in that. So you're going to learn a lot from that conversation, and I hope you come to that. And then Vicki Alger, who will talk about education policy. She's been in the Heartland Institute, I think, at least twice over the last 2 years, and she'll be back, and that'll be on March 14th. So February 7th and March 14th. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for the lively conversation. Thanks for keeping me on the fence on this issue. And no, not yet. I will read the book, and then I'll get back to you. Thank you all for coming, and have a safe drive home. Good night.